Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks, all of you out there, for tuning in to our great film, 9 to 5, The Story of a Movement. And I'd also like to welcome our special guest, Dr. Sandra Soto, who is of the Department of Gender and Women's Studies here at the University of Arizona, and Dr. Amalia Luxardo, who is a CEO of the Women's Foundation of Southern Arizona. We're eager to get questions from those of you who watched the film out there, but let's start with our two guests. Sandra, I think I'll go to you first. And I'm wondering how you found the film relevant to today's labor movement.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And I wish we could see the audience. We can't see folks at all, but thanks for coming to this after discussion and for asking that, Linda. I think of this film as highly relevant to our current moment and as having much to teach us in terms of strategy, solidarity, and also importantly, pleasure. One of the things that I love about 9 to 5, the story of a movement, is that it captures the sense of joy and pleasure that the women who are speaking, Nussbaum and others, they just light up when they're talking about the 9 to 5 movement and the 1970s, and I really appreciate that. And that's been my experience too as an organizer, is that it's just it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of pleasure. So I'll start there, or I'll leave those words.
Okay, okay, fantastic. And Amalia, this film obviously tells the story of the labor movement through a very gendered lens. It touches on race, but how would the picture change, you think, if you were looking at this through a prism of race, and why is that important?
Yeah, I think we all have to remember that when women were fighting for our collective rights then, that movement was largely led by white women. Specifically, we're talking about the gap in gender pay that still exists there. Um, right, white women make around 81 to 82 cents for the dollar of our male counterparts, but if you're looking at the spectrum of race, Latinos, for example, are at the bottom at 53 cents for the dollar, and then it goes up from there. And so, when we're talking about the labor movement, when we're talking about women's rights, I think it's really, really important to remember to use both the gender lens and the racial lens, so that we're including all women as part of the conversation.
Okay. I know the film, one of the questions that we got in talks about, we're making white women are making 82% of men's wages now. And like you said, it goes down from there. It was 59%, I think, for white women in the time that the film was made, or the time of the movement. Why is progress so slow in this area? Any theories? You'd think we would have hit 100% decades after, this movement, and since we became aware of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Say.
Sandy, you want to go
uh,
first? Yeah.
Sure. So there has been a huge backlash against labor and against organized labor over the past 30 or so years, and so we have made very little gains, and in fact have in many ways taken steps back. And so one of the things that is exciting and important to note about where we are today is that there is a resurgence in labor movements and labor organizing. There are more and more sectors that are unionizing. We just unionized at the University of Arizona, and we're working with Arizona State University, which is huge in the state of Arizona, to be working in what's called a wall-to-wall union, meaning that anybody who gets a paycheck from our two campuses can join our union. Local employees have just unionized. I mean, so we're there's so much movement happening, and part of the labor movement, one of the strategies right now is to work towards collective bargaining, which is one of the things that we've lost over time. Collective bargaining rights have been eroded because of neoliberal capitalism. And so one of the things we need to do is not just organize in our individual workplaces, but push for legislation, push for foundational change so that workers are protected.
Okay, we had somebody in our audience is asking that Arizona, traditionally a Republican state, has always been very anti-union, going back to the many tales of the mines, right, in Arizona, and organizing attempts to organize. Now Arizona's a blue state. Do you think this is going to change it? And that maybe the university unions are evidence of this. Do you think things will change now in Arizona, and how so? Um,
Sandy, I'm going to let you answer that since you are expert in that realm.
I absolutely think things are going to change. I really, really do. And why I'm optimistic, I'm not naturally an optimistic person. That's not my usual MO. But why I'm optimistic is because unions throughout Arizona are working together. So not just our union, but our union in conjunction with, say, domestic worker unions, with NAU's, which is Northern Arizona University, for those who aren't in Arizona, that's up in Flagstaff. They have a union that is the American Federation of Teachers, which is a different union from ours, but we're in conversation. So we're working across difference, and our eyes are on the state legislature, our eyes are on ABOR, which is the Arizona Board of Regents, and we are really, really energetic, and we're just working nonstop to make these changes. And I think that under Biden, things become more possible. The PRO Act, for instance, is a piece of legislation that has passed the House. Needs to pass the Senate, which will be harder, of course. But if it passes, it's going to be a big, big victory for labor. It is going to bring collective bargaining back. It's going to make it harder for so-called right to work legislation to continue to erode workers' rights. So yes, I'm very optimistic about Arizona.
Okay, great. And Amalia, how about Southern Arizona and maybe in some industries and areas beyond the university? What are you seeing with the women that you work with, their issues and where they want to go with improvements
Sure.
in the place?
Sure. I think I wanted to highlight a couple of things. Last year was a really, really challenging year because of the pandemic,
Sure.
amongst several other things. That was specifically so for women. We were hit hardest. In March alone, we lost 10 years of employment gains. By the end of 2020, single mothers lost 32 years of employment gains. So essentially, most of the work that was done was lost. And that's really it's a really difficult pill to swallow, right?
Yeah.
So what we're seeing, particularly from the Women's Foundation, we've done our work, we've done our research, we've identified 36 different career tracks that get households that are led by women out of the cycle of poverty, because that's what we aim to do in our organization, is to break that multi-generational cycle of poverty. And so we've identified those career tracks, and what we're doing now is working both at the legislative level and with our pilot program to get single moms into these programs so that we can start rebuilding the workforce. And so to your question, I think it's really, really important to think about women, think about households that are led by women, to start rebuilding the workforce, because we are the ones that were hit the hardest. We are the ones that lost most of the jobs. And so as we're starting to rebuild what these professional spaces look like, it needs to be with women in mind. And what does that mean then? Then we have to look at policies internally. We have to look at childcare and what does that look like
Sure.
for companies as well, something that's really important to consider. People think that childcare is something, oh yeah, we can drop off my kid. No, it's part of being able to go to work and being able to keep staff on board for long periods of time. So it's all of the things that we're looking at, like I said, both boots on the ground and at the legislative level, that I think is an important conversation that we should all have as a community.
Okay, that's a good point. As somebody else in our audience mentioned, and the film doesn't really talk about legislation that much. You see it as key to real change.
Absolutely.
The movie talks
Absolutely.
about. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. You asked that question before when you were saying why are we so slow to make progress? I mean, the reality is a lot of our leadership is still in the hands of men and who are perpetuating the very broken systems that we're in now. And so it's important to make those systems change in order for everything else to fall into place, which is why it's so important to be at the Capitol advocating for our women and girls here in Arizona,
Hmm.
so that policies change and we're able to move the needle in that way.
Hmm. Okay. I think it's perhaps kind of ironic that we're more aware than ever, I think, of the struggles of essential workers, our frontline workers since the pandemic, and we've seen how what a toll is taken on them, and how um, some of us are much more privileged in our work than others. Do you think that perhaps, Sandra, maybe you could address this? How is that going to affect these movements? Do you think to improve, protections, wages, et cetera, for working women? I'm thinking.
Yeah, one of the things that I wish that the film had done a little bit more of. I love the film. As I mentioned, there's a lot about the film that can help us think about labor issues today. One of the things I would have liked is a little bit more information, depiction of 9 to 5 today. There
Uh-huh.
is still a 9 to 5 movement today that has that same name. There's a chapter in Colorado. There are chapters all over. And if you study, as I did in preparation for this discussion, if you go to their website and study the way they represent themselves, the current 9 to 5 activists, it's very different from what we see in the film. Much more Black centered, much more women of color, and this goes back to Amalia's point earlier. It's much more intersectional, what we would call today intersectional. So you can't think about race in isolation from
Yeah.
gender, and essential workers are key to that kind of shift in thinking about labor. I think the pandemic has brought into sharper relief how little employers actually care about essential workers,
Hmm.
how willing employers, especially large employers, and universities are not immune from this, how willing they are to lay off essential workers and to treat those workers as disposable. So we have to, in our wall-to-wall union at the University of Arizona and Arizona State University, one of the things that's really important to us is for those of us with relatively more job security, so people like myself who have tenure, to speak out really, really loudly on behalf of those who are essential workers, those who are cleaning the classrooms, those who are maybe adjunct faculty,
Okay. Let me. Well,
those
I'm
who
gonna.
have to go into. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm going to kind of cut you off because we have a couple of other
Yeah.
questions coming in, and just kind of going back to the film, relating it to they did great things to get people signed up and sort of their stunts and get media attention. They were just great, and I'm wondering how that reflects today. And one big thing would be the changing technology. And I don't know, Amalia, in your work, um, how social media and again technology figures and you're getting the message out and recruiting and persuading.
Sure. So social media technology really has been one of our primary outlets, particularly to get folks, constituents on board for our advocacy work. So typically what, we have our advocacy session And every year we normally, under normal circumstances, we would have an advocacy day where we would invite community members to meet their representatives, talk about the bill that we're running and what a difference it would make here in the state of Arizona for women and girls, but we didn't have that opportunity this year. And so instead, all of our call to actions have all been electronic, and we have access to what's called request to speak, where you would get an account, sign in, and essentially say that you're supporting or opposing the bill. And this year we actually had um, largest the largest numbers in the request to speak in support of the bill that we're running, which is really, really exciting. And it's because the world has turned virtual. Last year, our reach simply online was around 280,000 constituents. And so we're hoping now that we've completely come to work remotely this year, that we'll have more people involved, at least by way of electronic, to get our bill passed this year. So we're really excited about that.
No, that's great. We've had a viewer write in that saying, I'm a nurse, and I was told 15 years ago by my professor when I started nursing that unions aren't good. And I guess we've been talking about this, with the pandemic, there seems to be a resurgence, et cetera. And how successful are we seeing signs of success yet in any of these movements, would you say?
Definitely seeing some success, even in what's called minority unions like ours in a right to work state. We're necessarily a minority union. And some of the successes have been pay raises for graduate students, and successful fights against privatization at our sibling unions that are also minority unions. So yeah, and I'm not surprised to hear from your guest that there has been this sense that unions are bad. That is a stereotype of unions that a lot of people unfortunately still have.
Yeah. And another related question, what labor force has changed a lot since the 1970s? And of course now you have the big tech companies, and Amazon is, there are labor issues that come up there. How do the jobs look out there now? How do industries look? How has the landscape changed in terms of the kind of workforce and the kind of jobs, really, and the job situations that people are encountering and have to deal with?
Well, talking about what the landscape looks like out there as far as work goes, the jobs that we've identified here locally that are going to be going through a boom over the next 5 years, and this was pre-pandemic, and so our researchers were right on the money. Largely had to do with tech and engineering, and working in these larger companies that provide these sorts of services. So that's where we're going to see a lot of again a lot of growth. And so what's happening now is that local community colleges like Pima Community College is rewriting some of their curriculum so that the certificates, education requirements are met, so that folks can get into those jobs.
Okay, all right. And how about the so-called gig economy, where people are Uber drivers, other things like that, where people are, in a way, they like being independent, but I'm curious about your view on how are those folks vulnerable? Will we ever see an Uber union, or if you know if I'm making any sense here, Sandra?
Yeah, I think we're seeing some progress in the gig economy in terms of organizing. It's harder, in a sense, for gig workers to organize because they are working solo, right? Just like domestic workers, it's harder for them to organize when you're in a house, as opposed to on a factory line where you can see your colleagues, or among a faculty where you're running into each other in the hallways. So, but the gig economy, the gig workers are organizing and are calling attention to how little pay they're getting, as the owners are just getting incredibly insanely wealthy, even during the pandemic. So it's not lost on them, and they are organizing. It's just taking a little it's going to take a different set of strategies because they're not seeing each other.
Mhm. Okay. Good. And okay, great. And going back to the film, someone would like to know who funded the 9 to 5 movement when it first started. Um, do either of you know? I don't. I don't know.
Actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'd want to know a little bit more about the question about funding, but as far as I know, it was a complete volunteer grassroots
Right.
organization among these workers.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And also, I don't know about you, but I was struck by the tenacity of these women who, when you're the pioneers, you don't have role models to follow. And what did you think about uh, their approach and their courage, which appeared, to speak to power, and the ways they approached it?
I
Uh,
think I think that was really inspiring, and you said you were talking about courage, really courageous, especially during that time. I think even now it it takes a certain amount of bravery and courage to be able, particularly as a woman, to be able to self advocate. We still continue to face challenges. We still to continue to break down walls, break
mhm.
the glass ceilings. Had we just had our first woman vice president elected,
Yeah,
and it's taken us how long to do that?
yeah,
And so even today, it takes a certain amount of courage in order for women to get to certain spaces to move the needle, for the women that come after us. And I found that to be incredibly inspiring.
Okay. And on that note, on that inspiring note, it's about time for us to wrap things up. Thank you so much, Dr. Soto. Thank you so much, Dr. Luxardo. I wish you the best in your endeavors. And thank you also to everybody who tuned in tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. Good night.
Thank you.